In the dead of winter, on the 3rd of February 2026, something happened in the Persian Gulf that sent shockwaves through every war room, every intelligence briefing, and every palace in the Middle East. 6 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps gunboats surrounded an American tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. They tried to seize it. The tanker ignored their demands and powered through. Escorted out by the United States Navy. It sounds like a minor incident. It was not. It was the latest spark in a fire that has been burning toward an explosion for months. And in Riyadh, inside the palaces of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the man who runs Saudi Arabia, the man who controls the most powerful military in the Arab world, alarms are going off. Not the alarms of a country preparing to fight. The alarms of a country that suddenly realizes it might not be prepared enough. Because here's what almost nobody is connecting right now. On that exact same day, February 3rd, 2026, the same day Iranian gunboats were playing war games in the Strait, Saudi Arabia and Turkey were sitting in Riyadh signing defense agreements. And the centerpiece of those discussions was something that should have the entire Western defense establishment asking serious questions. Mohammed bin Salman wants Turkish KAAN fighters, 5th-generation combat aircraft, built not in America, not in Europe, but in Ankara. And a decision, according to people who would know, could come at any moment. This is not a routine arms deal. This is a strategic signal of historic proportions. And once you understand what is happening in the skies above the Middle East right now, once you understand why Saudi Arabia is quietly walking away from total dependence on Washington for its air power, once you understand the extraordinary military and political calculations being made in Riyadh at this very moment, you will never look at this region the same way again. Stay with this until the end. Because the conclusion of this story is not what you expect. Let us go back to the beginning, not February 2026. Much further. To understand why Saudi Arabia is doing what it is doing right now, you have to understand a wound that is never fully healed. A wound inflicted not by Iran, not by Yemen, not by any enemy, but by the United States of America. The year was 2012. Saudi Arabia, watching Iran accelerate its nuclear program, watching Tehran's proxies in Yemen and Iraq grow stronger, watching the region tilt toward chaos, formally requested from Washington the purchase of F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters. The most advanced combat aircraft on Earth. The 5th-generation platform that would give the Royal Saudi Air Force the ability to penetrate any air defense system, to see before being seen, to strike before being struck. Washington said no, and then no again, and then again the year after. For 13 straight years, the answer from America was no. Not because Saudi Arabia could not afford them, not because Saudi Arabia did not meet the technical requirements. The answer was no because of one country, Israel. Under a long-standing arrangement between Washington and Jerusalem, the United States guarantees Israel what is called a qualitative military edge. No American weapons sold to any Middle Eastern nation should give that nation the ability to threaten Israeli military supremacy. The F-35, fully loaded with its complete software package, its sensor fusion, its AI-driven targeting, its network-centric warfare capabilities, was deemed too powerful to put in Saudi hands. For 13 straight years, Mohammed bin Salman watched Israel fly F-35s, watched America block Riyadh's requests, and filed the memory away. Then in November 2025, Donald Trump invited MBS to the White House. They announced a strategic defense agreement, the deal of the century, he called it. MBS smiled for the cameras. But here is what nobody told you. Within days, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And Netanyahu made one thing crystal clear. Saudi Arabia could have its F-35s, but they would not get the same F-35 that Israel flies. The software package commissioned for Riyadh would be stripped of key capabilities. The sensor fusion that makes the F-35 a revolutionary kill machine, the full-spectrum AI targeting updates, the network-centric data tools that allow Israeli F-35s to operate as a connected digital swarm, all of it would be locked away from Saudi pilots. Riyadh would receive a downgraded baseline configuration, a less-than version, a second-class seat on the most expensive fighter jet program in history. The F-35's software governs sensor fusion, data sharing, and mission planning. The United States can integrate Saudi jets with a configuration that restricts access to full-spectrum updates, AI-driven targeting, and the network-centric tools that Israel uses routinely. Saudi Arabia would fly the same airframe as Israel, but in a fundamentally different, fundamentally inferior way. And MBS, who has spent his entire career refusing to accept second-class treatment for Saudi Arabia, understood exactly what that meant. He understood it in his bones. So when Erdogan flew into Riyadh on February 3rd, 2026, and sat across from the Crown Prince with a model of the KAAN fighter jet on the table, Mohammed bin Salman was already listening very carefully. The KAAN. Let us talk about what this aircraft actually is, because the Western press has dramatically underestimated it. The KAAN is Turkey's domestically developed 5th-generation stealth fighter. built by Turkish Aerospace Industries, a program that has been running since 2010 and accelerated sharply after 2019. Why 2019? Because that was the year Turkey made the fateful decision to purchase Russia's S-400 air defense system. Washington responded by ejecting Turkey from the F-35 program, a NATO member with the second largest army in the entire alliance. A country that had been a loyal partner in American-led operations for decades was told it could no longer have the most advanced American fighter jet. Turkey's response was not to beg. Turkey's response was to build its own. The KAAN conducted its maiden flight in February 2024. It is 20.3 meters long. It has a wingspan of 13.4 meters. Its maximum takeoff weight is 34,750 kilograms. It is designed for air-to-air combat with next-generation weapons, precision strikes from internal weapon bays at supersonic speeds, and it runs on artificial intelligence and neural network targeting systems. Currently, it uses two General Electric F-110 engines, the same engines fitted to Turkish F-16s. In its current Block 1 configuration, analysts classify it as a 4.5 generation platform. But here is the detail that changes everything about this story. Turkey is developing a domestically produced engine, the TF-35000, expected to reach first testing by 2032 and full delivery by 2033. Once that engine is fitted, the KAAN becomes a true fifth-generation aircraft. And then it becomes something else entirely. It becomes the only fifth-generation combat aircraft in the entire Western world that is completely free from American ITAR restrictions, international traffic in arms regulations. The legal framework Washington uses to control what any country that buys American weapons can do with those weapons, who they can show them to, how they can modify them, what technologies they can transfer to allies. A Saudi F-35, even the downgraded version, comes with a permanent leash held in Washington. The KAAN with its indigenous engine comes with no leash at all. For a country that has watched Washington pull that leash repeatedly over 13 years, that distinction is not technical. It is existential. The discussions between Riyadh and Ankara have been ongoing for years, but they reached a completely new level at the World Defense Show 2026, held just outside Riyadh in February. Turkish Aerospace General Manager Mehmet Demiroglu walked the floor of that show and told Breaking Defense that talks are in the final stages of the decision-making process. He said the company hopes to reach a milestone by the end of 2026. He described a deal that could take multiple forms: a direct purchase of around 20 aircraft, what he called a small squadron, to give Saudi pilots and engineers experience with the platform. Or, if the order size justifies it, a final assembly line built in Saudi Arabia itself, which would require at least 50 aircraft to make the economics viable. Or, at the largest possible scale, a partnership extending into sixth-generation fighter development, which at Saudi Arabia's size and ambition level would justify orders measured in the hundreds. And then Demiroglu did something that sent a very specific message to everyone in that show hall. He placed a model of the KAAN at Turkish Aerospace's exhibit stand. Emblazoned on the tail of that model was a Saudi flag. This was not an accident. This was not a sales technique. This was a declaration. Look at the broader picture of what has been built between these two nations. Bilateral trade between Turkey and Saudi Arabia reached $8 billion in 2025. Turkish contractors have completed more than 400 projects in the kingdom with a total contract value of $30 billion. In 2023, Saudi Arabia signed an agreement for 60 Baykar Akinci unmanned combat aerial vehicles, Turkey's most powerful and battle-proven drone platform, with deliveries running through 2025 and 2026. A $2 billion renewable energy investment was signed during Erdogan's February visit, with large-scale solar plants to be built in central Turkey using Saudi capital. And at that same World Defense Show, Turkish Aerospace signed a memorandum of understanding with Saudi Arabia's General Authority for Military Industries to co-produce the Gokbey utility helicopter inside the kingdom, with the explicitly stated goal of making those co-produced helicopters available for export to other regional markets. The KAAN conversation is not happening in isolation. It is the crown jewel of what has quietly become one of the most consequential and most consequentially underreported defense industrial relationships in the entire Middle East. Saudi Arabia has expressed interest in potentially acquiring up to 100 KAAN fighters, with the emphasis not just on the aircraft themselves, but on technology transfer, joint production, and local industrial participation. This aligns perfectly with Vision 2030, Mohammed bin Salman's sweeping economic transformation program, which carries a hard mandate to achieve 50% domestic defense production inside the kingdom by 2030, 5 years from now. That mandate is driving every major defense conversation Riyadh is having with every defense company on the planet. The KAAN deal, structured correctly, does not just give Saudi Arabia fighter jets. It gives Saudi Arabia engineers trained in fifth-generation aerospace systems. It gives Saudi Arabia manufacturing facilities capable of producing cutting-edge military hardware. It gives Saudi Arabia the ability to build, maintain, and eventually evolve its own advanced aerospace capability inside its own borders, for its own purposes on its own timeline. Under the most ambitious version of the discussions, Turkish Aerospace would open an office inside the kingdom and use it as a regional hub capable of influencing other nations in the area. The co-produced aircraft would be available for export, turning Saudi Arabia from the world's most important weapons buyer into a weapons producer in its own right. That transformation, from customer to manufacturer, from dependent to autonomous, is the real prize that Mohammed bin Salman is reaching for. That is what Vision 2030 looks like when it becomes real in the defense sector. Before we get to the fires burning across the region right now, we have to address one more layer of the KAAN story that most coverage completely skips over. The question of why Turkey wants this deal as badly as Saudi Arabia does. Because this is not a one-sided negotiation. Erdogan needs Saudi investment in the KAAN program for reasons that go beyond money. Turkey's fighter jet program has run into a serious problem. The United States Congress has been quietly blocking the delivery of General Electric F-110 engines intended for the first batch of production KAAN aircraft. Washington has leverage over the program even now, even after ejecting Turkey from the F-35. As long as the KAAN depends on American engines, Turkey cannot fully escape that leverage. Saudi investment in the KAAN at scale accelerates Turkey's path toward the indigenous TF-35,000 engine program. Saudi capital and Saudi political weight changes the calculus in Washington about whether blocking those engine deliveries is worth the diplomatic cost. A Saudi-Turkish aerospace partnership is not just a defense deal. It is two nations who have both been burned by American weapons restrictions, telling each other that they are stronger together than apart. That dynamic, two significant American partners choosing to deepen their own defense relationship as a hedge against Washington's reliability, is the kind of shift that alters the geopolitical map in ways that take years to fully understand and decades to reverse. And there is one more thing you must understand about the Erdogan visit to Riyadh in February 2026. The Turkish president did not come alone to talk about fighter jets. He came with an entire ecosystem of agreements. 4 separate bilateral agreements were signed between Turkey and Saudi Arabia in a single day. The two countries adopted a joint statement covering defense industry, transportation, health, investments, and contracting services, a $2 billion renewable energy deal, a commitment to expand Turkish contractor activity in the kingdom, a memorandum to co-produce the Gokbey helicopter. The KAAN conversation was deliberately embedded inside a much broader strategic architecture. This was Erdogan and MBS demonstrating to each other and to the world watching that the relationship between Turkey and Saudi Arabia has moved from transactional to structural, from deal to alliance. But now we must talk about what is actually happening in the skies over the Middle East right now, because the KAAN deal does not exist in a vacuum. It exists against the backdrop of the most dangerous military escalation this region has seen in years. And you need to understand every piece of it. January 2026, Iran. The protests that began in late 2025 over economic collapse and political repression exploded into something massive. Nationwide unrest. And the Iranian government responded with extraordinary documented violence. American officials estimated that by the 3rd week of January, more than 6,200 people had been killed. Not arrested, killed. Donald Trump posted on social media that help was on the way. His national security team was asked to prepare what he called decisive military options. On January 26th, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was deployed to the Persian Gulf. Trump described sending what he called an armada, and he was not using that word loosely. By mid-February, reports emerged that Trump was considering deploying a second carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, which was completing drills off the Virginia coast. F-35A stealth fighters were repositioned from Rota Air Base in Spain to Meran Air Base. 6 more F-35s arrived at Lakenheath in the United Kingdom. At least 20 KC-135 Stratotanker refueling aircraft were concentrated at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a level of concentration that military analysts described as a significant surge far above any normal operational posture. The USS Gerald Ford was sent toward the Middle East. Officers on the ground were said to be preparing for what they called weeks-long operations against Iran. A new coordinating body, the Middle East Air Defense Combined Defense Operations Center, was formally opened at Al Udeid on January 12, 2026, designed specifically to synchronize air defense networks across the region against Iranian missile threats. Then on February 3rd, the same day Erdogan arrived in Riyadh, 6 IRGC gunboats attempted to seize a U.S. tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran's generals went on television to declare their forces were at the highest level of defensive preparedness, ready to crush any aggression. Iran's parliament threatened that if American forces acted, every U.S. base in every Gulf nation would be targeted. The Strait of Hormuz would be closed, the Bab al-Mandeb would be closed, the Suez Canal would be made insecure. These were not the threats of a country backing down. And here is where Mohammed bin Salman made his most consequential move. On January 28th, he picked up the phone and called Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian directly. The message was precise and unambiguous. Saudi Arabia would not allow the United States to use its airspace, its territory, or its bases to launch any attack on Iran. The Crown Prince called for diplomatic resolution. He expressed respect for Iranian sovereignty. The UAE made an identical declaration the following day. Both nations, America's closest Gulf allies, both of whom host American military forces on their soil, drew a line in the sand that stunned Washington. Saudi Arabia also sent Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman, MBS's younger brother and most trusted confidant, to Washington for urgent consultations with Rubio, with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, with Pentagon officials. The Saudis were simultaneously passing messages between Washington and Tehran in a desperate effort to prevent the entire region from detonating. And throughout all of this, Saudi Arabia was attending the World Defense Show in Riyadh. It was sitting down with Turkish Aerospace. It was looking at a KAAN model with a Saudi flag on its tail. And it was accelerating every single conversation about building an air force that does not depend entirely on Washington's decisions, Washington's politics, or Washington's relationship with Tel Aviv. This is the strategic logic that connects every thread of this story. Iran has ballistic missiles capable of reaching Riyadh. Iran's Houthi proxies in Yemen have spent years launching drones and cruise missiles at Saudi infrastructure, at Saudi airports, at Saudi oil facilities. In June 2025, during the brief but intense 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran, Iranian ballistic missiles struck Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American military installation in the entire Middle East. Patriot missile defense batteries intercepted most of those missiles, but one got through. One Iranian ballistic missile in the middle of the most heavily defended American base in the region penetrated all of those defenses and hit. That single fact registered inside every Gulf palace with the force of a revelation. No defense is perfect. No amount of American hardware is a complete guarantee. And if a wider war comes, Saudi Arabia, which sits between Yemen's Houthi-controlled territory to its south and Iran's missile arsenal to its north and east, will be in a position that no American carrier strike group can fully protect. Saudi Arabia already operates some of the most advanced F-15s in the world. Variants that American defense officials have acknowledged are in certain respects more capable than the ones flown by the United States Air Force. It operates Typhoon fighters. It has Patriot batteries across the kingdom. It has one of the best funded militaries on Earth. But what it does not have is the ability to project genuine fifth-generation air power. It does not have the ability to penetrate Iranian air defense systems with confidence. It does not have a stealth platform capable of engaging the most sophisticated threats that Iran is developing with Russian and Chinese assistance. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is not a theoretical threat. It is a demonstrated, tested, battle-proven capability. Iran has used these weapons in actual combat. During the Israeli-Iranian exchanges of 2024 and 2025, Iran demonstrated the ability to saturate advanced air defense systems with saturation salvos, overwhelming Patriot and Arrow batteries through sheer volume. The strategy is not precision. The strategy is mass. Launch enough missiles, and some will always get through. Saudi Arabia's cities, its oil infrastructure, its desalination plants that provide drinking water to millions of people, its airports and its economic arteries, all of these sit within range of Iran's most capable missiles. A conventional Saudi Air Force equipped with F-15s and Typhoons can intercept Iranian aircraft if they somehow get past Saudi air defenses. But it cannot reach into Iran's heartland to suppress the missile launch sites before they fire. Only a stealth platform can do that. Only a fifth-generation fighter with electronic warfare capabilities, with low observable design, with the ability to penetrate layered air defenses and strike the systems that threaten Saudi Arabia before they can threaten it, can close that gap. That is the capability that the F-35 was always supposed to provide. And that is the capability that the KAAN, fully developed, is designed to give. And every weapons request Saudi Arabia makes to Washington must still pass through that political filter that includes Israel's veto, American congressional delays, ITAR controls, and the ongoing humiliation of being offered downgraded equipment while a smaller neighboring country with very different interests receives the fully capable version. A senior Saudi analyst, Hesham Al-Ghanem, Director General of Strategic Studies at Naif Arab University in Riyadh, explained the KAAN interest to Middle East eye with surgical clarity. Saudi Arabia's interest, he said, is about having more choices, not about replacing the United States, because replacing the United States is not possible. But, he continued, if the American administration sees arms sales as a competition, it might view this as a sign that Saudi Arabia is drifting away. The message from Riyadh to Washington, delivered in the language of defense procurement, is ancient and simple. We have options. Never forget that we have options. Washington heard it immediately. Trump officials began pressing Riyadh for clarity on its defense talks with Turkey almost the moment they became public. But here's the part even the most sophisticated analysts are missing. This time, the alternative is not political theater. The KAAN is a real aircraft from a real aerospace power with real export momentum. Indonesia has already signed an agreement to purchase up to 48 KAAN fighters in a deal announced in June 2025, making Jakarta the program's first confirmed international customer. Azerbaijan is engaged in cooperation tied to production and development. Turkey's defense industry has grown with extraordinary speed. Its Bayraktar TB2 drones transformed the battlefield in Libya, in Syria, in Ukraine, in Nagorno-Karabakh. Turkey is not a novelty defense exporter. It is a serious one. And the KAAN's path to true fifth-generation capability with its indigenous engine program targeting 2032 to 2033 is on a timeline that actually works for Saudi Arabia's needs. The first 10 Block 1 KAANs are scheduled for delivery to Turkey's Air Force between 2030 and 2033. Saudi Arabia, at the scale of order being discussed, could have its own aircraft on a similar timeline, possibly earlier if the partnership is structured ambitiously enough. And there is one final dimension to this story that most coverage completely ignores. It is about the kind of nation Mohammed bin Salman is choosing to build over the next 5 decades. He is 39 years old. He will almost certainly govern Saudi Arabia for the next half-century. He has watched in his adult lifetime America remake and then abandon Afghanistan. He has watched Washington zigzag on Iran for 20 years without producing a resolution. He has watched the old certainties of American power in the Middle East become progressively less certain with every passing year. He has watched American domestic politics reshape the entire strategic relationship between Washington and Riyadh repeatedly and unpredictably. And he has decided, with the methodical long-term thinking that defines everything he does, that Saudi Arabia needs a defense industrial foundation that does not depend on any single foreign power, as continued goodwill, continued political stability, or continued willingness to treat Riyadh as an equal. The KAAN deal, in its most ambitious form, does not give Saudi Arabia a fighter jet. It gives Saudi Arabia an aerospace ecosystem, engineers, manufacturing lines, technology transfer, a path toward the ability to design, build, and evolve its own military aircraft inside its own territory, on its own terms, for its own purposes. Under the vision being discussed, Turkish Aerospace would establish a permanent regional office inside the kingdom, serving as a hub that could influence procurement decisions across the entire Arab world. Saudi Arabia would move from being the planet's most important weapons customer to being a weapons producer capable of shaping what its neighbors fly. That is not an arms deal. That is a geopolitical transformation. Here is where we arrive at the conclusion that reframes everything you have just heard. Most Western analysts look at this story and see a negotiating tactic. Saudi Arabia playing Turkey off against America to squeeze out a better F-35 deal. A familiar dance in an old game? Perhaps they are right. Perhaps in 12 months, Riyadh and Washington announce an enhanced F-35 package. The KAAN talks cool, and everything returns to a familiar pattern. But consider seriously the possibility that this analysis is wrong. Consider the possibility that what Mohammed bin Salman is building is something more durable, more visionary, and more transformative than a bargaining chip. Consider that we are watching the moment when the Arab world's most powerful nation decides that genuine strategic autonomy is worth more than the comfort of guaranteed but conditional American protection. Not because MBS wants to abandon the United States. America is still indispensable. But because he has understood with absolute clarity that America cannot always be relied upon to act in Saudi Arabia's interests. Not when Israel holds veto power over what Riyadh can fly. Not when American domestic politics can reshape the entire relationship overnight. Not when an Iranian missile can penetrate al-Udeid's defenses while Washington is still in meetings debating whether to respond. The KAAN fighter jet, sitting on that exhibit, stand at the World Defense Show in Riyadh with a Saudi flag painted on its tail, is not simply an aircraft on display. It is a statement delivered to every power watching this region. It is Mohammed bin Salman saying to Washington and to Tehran and to every government that has spent decades assuming it understood this kingdom that Saudi Arabia is no longer content to play the role of the world's most important weapons customer. Saudi Arabia is reaching for something bigger, something harder to control, something that will last long after the current crisis with Iran is resolved and the carrier strike groups sail home. Whether this specific deal closes in 2026 or takes longer, whether it is 20 jets or 50 or 100, the direction of travel is now set, and it does not reverse. The world's largest oil exporter, sitting at the hinge point of the most dangerous military confrontation this region has seen in years, is making a calculated, deliberate, generational bet on independence. And every government in the world that thought it understood the power dynamics of the Middle East is going to have to update its understanding. Completely. Think about what that means on a map. Think about the chain reaction that begins the moment Saudi Arabia announces it will co-produce KAAN fighters on its own soil. Every Gulf state that has been watching this negotiation, every Arab nation that has spent decades accepting American conditions on its weapons purchases, every government in the wider Muslim world that has watched Turkey build a credible indigenous defense industry from nothing, will see that announcement and ask the same question. If Saudi Arabia can do it, why can't we? The KAAN deal between Riyadh and Ankara will not stay a bilateral story. It will become a template, an advertisement, a proof of concept for strategic autonomy that spreads across the region, with consequences that no one in Washington or Jerusalem has fully modeled. The world is watching Riyadh, and Riyadh is watching the world watch it. Mohammed bin Salman understands the signal value of this decision perfectly. That is why it is being made in this way, at this moment, with this level of visibility. The Saudi flag on that KAAN model at the World Defense Show was not subtle. It was designed to be seen by everyone in that hall and everyone who would read about that hall afterward. The message was sent, the message was received, and now the clock is ticking on a response. The gunboats in the Strait of Hormuz on February 3rd were not just a provocation, they were a reminder that this region remains contested, that its skies are watched by forces that do not always answer to Washington, and that the balance of power that has governed these waters for 4 decades is under pressure from every direction simultaneously. And in Riyadh, a 39-year-old crown prince who has never once accepted second place is watching all of it, measuring all of it, and moving toward a decision that will reshape the military architecture of the Middle East for an entire generation. The KAAN is coming. The only question is when, and when it touches down on Saudi soil, the equation that everyone thought was fixed will have permanently, irreversibly changed.